The raid on the Nevada outpost had been a success, but it came at a cost. The resistance fighters who survived the mission returned battered and bruised, their spirits weighed down by the losses they'd suffered. Claire bore the physical scars of battle, a deep gash on her arm that refused to heal properly, and Jake carried the emotional burden of seeing his wife in such pain. Despite the victory, the reality of their situation loomed large. The Vorthak were still stronger, better, equipped and seemingly endless in number. Humanity's first taste of triumph was fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that the invaders wouldn't rest until every last human was either enslaved or dead. But amidst the grief and exhaustion, there was a spark of hope. The explosions at the outpost had destroyed hundreds of Zetherium cores, crippling the Vorthak's operations in the region for weeks. Word of the sabotage spread quickly through encrypted radio transmissions, inspiring other resistance groups to take similar risks. Emily's discovery of the mineral's vulnerability had proven invaluable, and now her corrosive grenades were being replicated as fast as possible. People worked tirelessly in hidden workshops, crafting weapons that could level the playing field, if only slightly, against the alien invaders. Jake stood outside the makeshift camp where the group had regrouped after the raid. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine trees and damp earth. He stared at the horizon, his mind racing with thoughts of what came next. The attack on the outpost had shown them that hitting the Vorthak where it hurt, their resources, was the key to slowing their advance. But one raid wasn't enough. They needed to strike again, harder this time, before the invaders recovered. "We can't stop now," Sam said, stepping up beside him. His voice was low but firm, his eyes scanning the forest around them. "They'll be looking for us. If we don't hit them again soon, they'll crush us." Jake nodded, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. "I know, but we're running out of people willing to take the risk. Every fight costs us someone." Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I get it, but sitting here waiting for them to find us isn't an option either. We've got momentum. Let's use it while we still can." Inside the main tent, Emily was hard at work refining her designs for the corrosive grenades. Her hands moved deftly over a cluttered table, assembling components scavenged from abandoned buildings and crashed Vorthak drones. Around her, others helped wherever they could, soldering wires, mixing chemicals, and testing prototypes. The atmosphere was tense but focused, everyone aware of the stakes. Claire entered the tent holding a tray of food she'd prepared for the group. She set it down near Emily, offering a small smile. "You should eat something," she said softly. "You've been at this all night." Emily glanced up briefly, her face pale and drawn from lack of sleep. "There's no time," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "Every second we waste is another chance for them to rebuild." "I know," Claire said gently, "but you won't do anyone any good if you collapse from exhaustion." Reluctantly, Emily paused her work and reached for a piece of bread. As she ate, she looked at Claire, noticing the bandage wrapped tightly around her arm. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Claire shrugged, forcing a smile. "I've been worse. Honestly, I'm just glad we got out alive." Emily nodded, guilt flickering across her face. "I wish Marcus could have seen this. He gave his life so we could get that data." "You did what he asked," Claire said firmly. "You got the information to the resistance. That's what matters." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the tent. Jake ducked inside, followed closely by Sam. Both men looked grim, their expressions unreadable. "We've got a problem," Jake said without preamble. "What is it?" Emily asked, setting the bread aside. "One of our scouts spotted a convoy heading south," Sam explained. "It's carrying more Zetherium cores, probably meant to replace the ones we destroyed at the outpost. If we let them get to their destination, they'll reinforce the Vorthak positions in California." "How big is the convoy?" Emily asked, already calculating the odds. "Big," Jake replied. "At least a dozen trucks plus armored escorts. We're talking heavy firepower." Claire frowned, worry etched into her features. "That's suicide. We can't take them head on." "No, we can't," Jake agreed, "which is why we need to think smarter. We ambush them, Use the terrain to our advantage. Emily leaned forward, her mind working furiously. What if we rig the road with traps? Explosives laced with the corrosive compounds could disable their vehicles and scatter the cores. They won't expect it. Sam nodded slowly. It's risky, but it might work. We'd need to move fast, though. They'll be passing through the canyon tomorrow morning. Then we don't have much time, Jake said, standing up. Let's get to work. The next day, the resistance team set up their ambush in the narrow canyon where the convoy was expected to pass. The rocky walls towered above them, casting long shadows across the dirt road below. Jake led a small group tasked with planting explosives along the route, while Emily stayed behind to oversee the final preparations. Claire and Sam coordinated the positioning of snipers on the cliffs overlooking the canyon, ensuring they had clear lines of sight. As dawn broke, the distant rumble of engines signaled the convoy's approach. The tension among the fighters was palpable, their breaths shallow and their hearts pounding. Jake crouched behind a boulder, gripping his rifle tightly. Beside him, Claire checked her weapon one last time, her hands steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. When the first truck appeared, Jake raised his hand, signaling the team to hold their fire. The convoy stretched out behind it, a line of massive vehicles flanked by armed guards. As the lead truck passed over the first trap, Jake gave the signal. A deafening explosion rocked the canyon, sending shards of metal and debris flying into the air. The truck flipped onto its side, blocking the road and causing chaos among the remaining vehicles. Chaos erupted as the resistance fighters opened fire from their concealed positions. Grenades laced with corrosive chemicals rained down on the convoy, eating away at the Xytherium cores and disabling the trucks. The Vorthak soldiers scrambled to respond, but the narrow confines of the canyon made it difficult for them to maneuver effectively. From her perch on the cliff, Emily watched the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and dread. The plan was working, better than she'd dared to hope. But the cost was high. Bullets whizzed past her head as Vorthak reinforcements arrived, attempting to flank the resistance fighters. Below, Jake and Claire fought side by side, covering each other as they moved from cover to cover. "Fall back," Sam shouted over the commotion, realizing the tide was turning against them. The Vorthak were regrouping, bringing in heavier weapons that threatened to overwhelm the ambushers. Jake hesitated, unwilling to leave the battlefield until the job was done. But Claire grabbed his arm, pulling him toward safety. "We've done enough," she urged. "If we stay, we'll lose everyone." Reluctantly, Jake followed her, firing off a few more shots before retreating into the woods. Behind them, the canyon continued to burn, the wreckage of the convoy smoldering under the relentless assault of the corrosive grenades. Back at the camp, the survivors gathered around a crackling fire, their faces streaked with dirt and blood. The mood was somber. Several members of the team hadn't made it back. But the mission had succeeded. The convoy had been decimated, its precious cargo of Xytherium cores destroyed or scattered beyond recovery. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity tasted true victory. It was a small win in the grand scheme of things, but it proved something vital. The Vorthak could bleed, and if they could bleed, they could fall. As the flames danced in the night, Jake looked around at the weary faces of his comrades. They were battered and broken, but they were alive and they were fighting back. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The resistance was growing, but so were the challenges. Every victory came at a price, and every step forward seemed to invite 2 steps back from the Vorthak. Jake, Claire, and their group had managed to strike a few blows against the invaders, destroying supply depots and slowing their advance in certain areas, but it wasn't enough. The Vorthak adapted quickly, tightening their grip on the planet with ruthless efficiency. They knew humanity was fighting back, and they responded with brutal force. In Chicago, Emily Dawson sat hunched over her laptop in a dimly lit basement. She had barely slept since escaping the drone facility, haunted by the memory of Marcus's sacrifice. His words echoed in her mind. Get this info to the resistance. It was a burden she carried willingly, but one that weighed heavily on her shoulders. Around her, makeshift workbenches were cluttered with tools, wires, and pieces. of alien technology scavenged from battle sites. This was her lab now, a far cry from the pristine facilities she once worked in, but it would have to do. Emily opened the files she had retrieved from the Vorthak terminal. The data was complex, filled with symbols and equations that took hours to decode. But as she pieced together the information, a pattern began to emerge. The Zetherium cores, the mineral the Vorthak relied on to power their weapons and defenses, were not invincible. In fact, they were vulnerable to specific chemical compounds found naturally on Earth. Compounds like sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, and even certain plant extracts could corrode the mineral over time. "What does this mean?" Claire asked, leaning over Emily's shoulder. She had traveled to Chicago with Jake and Sam to deliver supplies and share intel. Seeing Emily's discovery firsthand had reignited her hope, but she was still trying to understand its implications. "It means we can hurt them," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. "If we can replicate these chemicals and use them against the Vorthak, we might be able to disable their weapons or at least weaken them." Jake frowned, his arms crossed as he processed the information. "That's great, but how do we get close enough to use them? Their ships are protected by shields, and their soldiers don't exactly give us time to set up experiments." Emily nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "We'll need something small and portable, something we can smuggle into their bases or attach to their equipment without being noticed. Maybe grenades laced with the corrosive compounds or traps rigged to explode when triggered." Sam Turner stroked his chin thoughtfully. "It's risky, but it could work. We'd need volunteers willing to take big chances, though." "We've got no shortage of those," Jake said grimly. He glanced around the room at the other members of the resistance gathered there. Each face reflected a mix of determination and fear. These were ordinary people, farmers, teachers, mechanics, who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Yet here they were, ready to risk everything for a chance to fight back. While Emily focused on developing the new weapons, Jake and Sam led a mission to test the theory. Their target was a Vorthak outpost located in the Nevada desert, miles away from any major city. The outpost served as a storage hub for Zetherium cores, making it a prime location for sabotage. If they succeeded, they could cripple the Vorthak's operations in the region and buy humanity more time. The journey to Nevada was long and grueling. The group traveled at night to avoid detection, moving silently across barren landscapes under the cover of darkness. By day, they hid in caves or abandoned buildings, rationing food and water while keeping watch for patrols. Tensions ran high, but everyone understood the stakes. Failure wasn't an option. When they finally reached the outskirts of the outpost, they paused to observe. The facility was surrounded by towering walls topped with razor wire, and armed Vorthak soldiers patrolled the perimeter. Inside, rows of crates containing Zetherium cores were stacked neatly, waiting to be transported to the invaders' larger bases. "This is going to be tricky," Sam muttered, adjusting the strap of his rifle. "But if we can get inside, we can plant the explosives." Jake nodded, his jaw clenched. "We'll split into two teams. One will create a diversion to draw the guards away, while the other sneaks in and sets the charges," Claire volunteered. For the diversion team, much to Jake's protest. "I'm not sitting this one out," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You need someone who can think on their feet, and you know it." Reluctantly, Jake agreed. He trusted Claire's instincts, even if it terrified him to let her put herself in danger. Together, they finalized the plan and prepared to execute it. That night, chaos erupted outside the outpost. Claire and two others drove a stolen truck loaded with flammable materials straight toward the gate, firing shots wildly to draw attention. The noise and flames sent the Vorthak scrambling, their glowing eyes scanning the area for threats. As the guards rushed to deal with the distraction, Jake and Sam slipped through a gap in the wall, moving swiftly and silently toward the storage area. Inside, they planted the explosives carefully, ensuring each charge was positioned near a cluster of Zetherium crates. The devices were crude but effective, designed to release a burst of corrosive chemicals upon detonation. When the timers were set, Jake tapped Sam on the shoulder. "Let's move." They retraced their steps, hearts pounding as they neared the exit. Just as they reached the wall, however, alarms blared throughout the compound. The diversion had failed. Claire and her team had been spotted. "Go!" Jake shouted at Sam, pushing him toward the opening. "I'll hold them off." "No, wait," Sam shot back, gripping his weapon tightly. "We stick together, remember?" Before Jake could argue further, a squad of Vorthak soldiers rounded the corner, their weapons raised. The two men fired simultaneously, taking down several enemies before ducking behind cover. Bullets whizzed past their heads, and the air grew, thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Meanwhile, Claire fought desperately to escape. Her team had been overwhelmed, and she was the only one left standing. Blood trickled down her arm from a graze wound, but she refused to give. Up, grabbing a discarded rifle, she returned fire, buying precious seconds for Jake and Sam to make their getaway. As the first explosion rocked the outpost, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the sky, Jake grabbed Sam's arm and pulled him toward the exit. "Move!" he yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Behind them, the second and third explosions followed in rapid succession, each one louder than the last. The ground shook violently, and the sound of crumbling structures filled the air. The Vorthak screamed in anger, their voices distorted and inhuman. Claire stumbled out of the chaos moments later, her clothes torn and her face streaked with dirt. Jake caught sight of her and ran to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm fine," she replied, though her pale face told a different story. "Did we do it?" Jake nodded, a faint smile breaking through his grim expression. "Yeah, we did." Back at the resistance base, news of the successful raid spread quickly. Emily listened intently as Jake recounted the details, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. The Vorthak weren't invincible. They could be hurt, weakened, and driven back. But the celebration was short-lived. The Vorthak retaliated with overwhelming force, launching a series of devastating attacks on known resistant strongholds. Cities burned brighter than ever, and the skies darkened with the smoke of countless fires. Survivors fled deeper into the wilderness, pursued relentlessly by the invaders. Yet even as the world crumbled around them, the resistance refused to yield. Emily continued refining her designs, creating more efficient versions of the corrosive weapons. Jake, Claire, and Sam regrouped with their allies, planning their next move, and scattered pockets of fighters across the globe kept pushing forward, united by a shared belief that humanity's spirit could never truly be extinguished. The war was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The days following the Vorthak's arrival were a blur of chaos and destruction. Cities crumbled under relentless attacks, their streets littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. The invaders moved methodically, seizing key locations, power, plants, communication hubs, military bases, and leaving little room for humanity to regroup. Smoke choked the air, and the constant hum of alien ships overhead served as a grim reminder that Earth was no longer its own. Jake and Claire had driven for hours after fleeing their home in Montana, heading west toward the mountains. They hoped the rugged terrain would offer some protection from the Vorthak's advanced technology. Along the way, they encountered other survivors, families huddled in makeshift camps, farmers guarding what little food they had left, and lone wanderers, desperate for safety. Each face told a story of loss but also of resilience. People were beginning to realize that running wasn't enough. They needed to fight back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake pulled the truck off the road and parked near an old gas station. The building was abandoned, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. Inside, they found canned goods and bottled water scattered across the floor, likely left behind by looters. While Claire sorted through the supplies, Jake kept watch outside, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He scanned the darkening landscape, his sharp eyes catching every movement. It was then that he noticed them, a group of 4 people approaching, cautiously from the trees. At first, Jake tensed, gripping his weapon tightly. But when one of the figures raised a hand in greeting, he relaxed slightly. "Who are you?" Jake called out, his voice firm but not aggressive. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face, his clothes torn and dirty. "Name's Sam Turner," he said, his tone calm but weary. "We're just trying to survive like everyone else." Jake hesitated before lowering his rifle. "You alone?" Sam shook his head. "There's more of us back at our camp. We've been keeping tabs on the Vorthak movements, thought maybe we could team up." Claire emerged from the gas station carrying a box of supplies. She looked wary but nodded when Jake gave her a reassuring glance. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear lingering in her eyes. Sam explained that his group had been organizing small-scale attacks against the invaders, ambushing supply convoys, sabotaging equipment, anything to slow them down. "We can't take them head-on," he admitted. "But if we hit them where it hurts, we might buy ourselves some time." Jake mulled it over. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he knew how to handle himself in a fight, and deep down he felt a growing determination to resist. "All right," he said finally. "We'll join you. For now." In Chicago, Emily Dawson navigated the ruins of the city with Marcus Lee, a wiry young man whose quick thinking and technical skills had saved both their lives more than once. The two had met, by chance while hiding in a subway tunnel during one of the Vorthak's bombing runs. Since then, they'd formed an unlikely partnership, combining Emily's scientific knowledge with Marcus's hacking expertise to stay one step ahead of the invaders. Their current mission was risky, but necessary: infiltrate a Vorthak drone facility and extract data that could reveal weaknesses in the aliens' technology. The facility was located in the heart of downtown, surrounded by heavily armed patrols. Getting in undetected would be nearly impossible, but Emily refused to give up. If anyone could find a way to turn the tide, it was her. As they crouched behind a pile of rubble, Marcus adjusted the small device in his hands, a crude jammer he'd built using scavenged parts. "This should disable their surveillance drones for about 10 minutes, he whispered. "After that, we're on our own." Emily nodded, clutching a backpack filled with tools and spare electronics. "Let's move." They darted from cover to cover, avoiding the piercing beams of searchlights that swept the area. When they reached the entrance to the facility, Marcus planted the jammer on a nearby wall and activated it. Immediately, the drones hovering above went silent, their glowing eyes dimming as they plummeted to the ground. "Now," Marcus hissed, gesturing for Emily to follow him inside. The interior of the facility was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery. Rows of sleek metallic drones lined the walls, their designs sleek and alien. Emily worked quickly, connecting, her laptop to a terminal and sifting through streams of encrypted data. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she decrypted files, searching for anything useful. "Got it," she murmured triumphantly after several tense minutes. A blueprint appeared on her screen, detailing the inner workings of the Vorthak's weapon systems. More importantly, it highlighted a critical flaw. The Zytherium cores powering their technology were highly susceptible to corrosion caused by certain chemical compounds found naturally on Earth. "This is it," Emily breathed, downloading the information onto a portable drive. "If we can replicate these compounds and use them against the Vorthak, we might stand a chance." Before they could celebrate, however, alarms blared throughout the facility. The jammer must have worn off. "Time to go," Marcus shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the exit. Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridors. Vorthak soldiers, tall, insect-like creatures with razor-sharp claws, emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes locking onto their prey. Emily and Marcus sprinted toward the door, dodging blasts of energy that tore chunks out of the walls around them. Just as they reached the threshold, Marcus stopped suddenly and turned back. "Keep going," he yelled at Emily, who hesitated. "I'll hold them off." "No," Emily protested, tears welling in her eyes. "We stick together." "There's no time to argue," Marcus snapped, shoving her forward. "Get this info to the Resistance. That's the only way we win." Reluctantly, Emily obeyed, forcing herself to keep running even as guilt gnawed at her. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire followed by silence. She didn't look back. Meanwhile, in the mountains, Jake, Claire, and Sam's group had set up a temporary base in an abandoned cabin. Around a flickering fire, they discussed their next move. News of Emily and Marcus's discovery spread quickly thanks to encrypted radio transmissions sent out by surviving scientists and engineers. The resistance was beginning to coalesce, forming networks of fighters determined to reclaim their planet. "We need to hit them hard," Sam said, leaning forward with intensity. "Show them we're not going to roll over and die." Jake agreed, though he couldn't shake the memory of the destruction he'd seen. "But we can't just throw ourselves at them blindly. We need a plan," Claire chimed in, her voice soft, but firm. "Maybe we don't need to fight them directly. What if we focus on cutting off their resources? Without those mineral cores they're so dependent on, they'll be weaker." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea. Let's start targeting their supply lines. Hit them where it hurts." Over the next few days, the group executed a series of coordinated strikes. Using improvised explosives and guerrilla tactics, they destroyed Vorthak storage depots and disrupted their operations. Word of their success spread, inspiring others to join the cause. Slowly, but surely, the resistance grew stronger. Yet even as hope began to take root, the cost of defiance became painfully clear. Lives were lost, homes burned, and scars etched into the hearts of those who fought. But amidst the pain, a new spirit emerged, one fueled by courage, unity, and an unyielding belief in the possibility of victory. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity dared to dream of a future free from the shadow of the Vorthak. The sky above Chicago was unusually quiet that morning. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the city in hues of orange and pink. Birds chirped lazily, and the streets were slowly coming alive with the hum of early risers heading to work or school. It was a peaceful scene, one that seemed almost too ordinary to notice anything out of place. But deep down, something felt off. People couldn't quite put their finger on it, but there was an unspoken tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Jake Mitchell stood outside his small garage in rural Montana, wiping grease from his hands onto a dirty rag. He had spent the better part of the morning fixing up an old tractor for a neighbor. The sound of birdsong filled the crisp mountain air, mingling with the distant rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the valley. Jake paused for a moment, leaning against the hood of the tractor, and gazed up at the clear blue sky. Something about it made him uneasy, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Inside the house, Claire Mitchell was busy preparing breakfast. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, humming softly to herself as she flipped pancakes on the stove. Her golden brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face glowed with warmth despite the chill outside. Claire always had a way of making even the simplest moments feel special. Today, however, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was subtle, just a faint prickling at the back of her neck, but it was enough to make her glance nervously toward the window every few minutes. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Chicago, Emily Dawson sat hunched over her laptop in a cramped apartment cluttered with books and research papers. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside her, growing cold as she pored over data from a recent astronomical observation. Emily was a brilliant astrophysicist known for her sharp mind and relentless curiosity, but today her focus wavered. She kept glancing at the clock, wondering if she should turn on the news. There had been strange reports circulating online all week. Rumors of unidentified objects hovering near Earth's orbit. Most dismissed them as conspiracy theories, but Emily couldn't ignore the nagging voice in her head telling her to dig deeper. At precisely 8:47 a.m. local time, everything changed. A deafening roar split the skies, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. In Montana, Jake dropped the rag he'd been holding and instinctively ducked, shielding his head as the noise grew louder. Overhead, the once clear sky darkened as massive shapes descended from above. They were enormous, larger than any aircraft Jake had ever seen, and they moved with an eerie grace, casting long shadows across the landscape. The metallic surfaces of the ships gleamed ominously under the fading sunlight, and strange symbols etched into their hulls pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Claire rushed out of the house, her eyes wide with fear. "Jake, what is that?" She shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "I don't know," Jake replied, his jaw clenched tightly. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared up at the monstrous vessels. Whatever they were, they didn't belong here. In Chicago, the reaction was much the same. Cars screeched to a halt in the middle of busy intersections as drivers abandoned their vehicles to get a better look at the sky. Pedestrians froze in place, pointing upward in disbelief. Even Emily stepped away from her computer, her scientific curiosity momentarily overtaken by sheer awe and dread. Through her apartment window, she watched as 3 colossal ships hovered silently above the city skyline, blocking out the sun. Then came the transmission. Every television, radio, and smartphone screen flickered to life simultaneously, displaying a single image, a towering figure with elongated limbs and luminous green eyes. Its skin shimmered like liquid metal, and its expressionless face sent chills down spines worldwide. Behind it, rows of similarly alien beings stood rigidly, their presence exuding authority and power. "Humans of Earth," the creature began, its voice resonating unnaturally as if spoken by multiple entities at once. "We are the Vorthak. Your planet has been selected for assimilation into our empire. You will surrender your resources, your cities, and your lives to serve us. Resistance is futile." The message repeated itself in dozens of languages, ensuring no one missed its meaning. Panic erupted instantly. Crowds scattered in every direction, screaming and crying. Some collapsed to their knees in despair while others frantically tried to flee. Phone lines jammed as people desperately called loved ones only to find networks overloaded. Jake grabbed Claire's hand and pulled her back inside the house. "We need to get out of here," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Now." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. She trusted Jake implicitly. He had always been the strong one, the protector. Together they hurriedly packed essentials into a duffel bag: food, water, flashlights, matches, and a hunting rifle Jake kept for emergencies. As they worked, the sound of explosions echoed in the distance. The Vorthak weren't wasting any time. Back in Chicago, Emily found herself rooted to the spot, unable to tear her gaze away from the screen. The implications of what she was witnessing hit her like a freight train. These weren't just invaders, they were conquerors. And judging by the size of their fleet and the advanced technology they possessed, humanity stood little chance of fighting back. But then, amidst the terror gripping her city, a spark of defiance ignited within her. This wasn't the first time Earth had faced extinction-level threats, and it wouldn't be the last. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters. If anyone could find a way to resist these invaders, it was them. With a renewed determination, Emily grabbed her laptop and a backpack stuffed with supplies. She knew staying in the city would be suicide. The Vorthak would likely target urban centers first. But she also knew she couldn't run blindly. She needed allies, people who understood science, strategy, and survival. And she needed answers as she slipped out of her building and melted into the chaos-filled streets. Emily vowed to do whatever it took to fight back. Somewhere, somehow, there had to be a weakness in the Vorthak's seemingly impenetrable armor. All she had to do was find it. Across the country, similar scenes played out. Families fled their homes, abandoning possessions they'd worked years to acquire. Soldiers scrambled to mobilize, though their outdated weapons seemed laughably inadequate compared to the alien arsenal. Governments issued frantic statements urging citizens to remain calm, but their words fell on deaf ears. Fear had taken hold, spreading faster than wildfire. Yet not everyone succumbed to despair. In basements, forests, and abandoned warehouses, small groups of survivors began banding together. They shared stories, pooled resources, and devised plans. Among them were Jake and Claire, driving westward in their battered truck, hoping to reach higher ground where the Vorthak might struggle to follow. Along the way, they encountered others like them, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. By nightfall, the full extent of the invasion became horrifyingly clear. Cities burned, highways clogged with desperate refugees, and the skies remained dominated by the ominous shapes of alien vessels. The world had changed forever in the span of a single day, but even as hope dwindled, tiny embers of resistance flickered to life, refusing to be extinguished. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the Vorthak observed Earth's reaction with cold detachment. To them, this conquest was merely another step in their endless expansion, a necessary act of survival for their species. They had no concept of mercy or compassion, only dominance. What they didn't realize, however, was that Earth wasn't like the countless other worlds they had conquered. It was different, unique, and its inhabitants, fragile though they might seem, carried within them a fire that no amount of force could extinguish. For now, the invaders held the upper hand. But unbeknownst to them, the real battle had only just begun. The victory at the canyon was a turning point for the resistance, but it came with consequences. The Vorthak, enraged by their losses, launched a series of brutal counterattacks across the region. Entire towns were razed to the ground, and survivors were rounded up and taken to heavily guarded camps. The invaders' message was clear: defiance would not be tolerated. Yet even as fear spread like wildfire, the resistance found itself facing another enemy, one from within. Tensions began to rise among the fighters. After weeks of relentless battles and mounting casualties, cracks started to form in the unity that had once bound them together. Some believed in continuing all-out warfare, striking hard and fast to cripple the Vorthak before they could recover. Others argued for a more cautious approach, focusing on sabotage, stealth, and survival, rather than risking everything in direct confrontations. The debate grew heated, threatening to splinter the fragile alliance they had built. Jake stood at the center of the storm, caught between two opposing sides. On one hand, Sam Turner pushed for aggressive action, insisting that humanity couldn't afford to play it safe any longer. "We've got momentum," he shouted during one particularly tense meeting. "If we don't keep hitting them now, they'll crush us." On the other side, Claire advocated for restraint. Her voice was calm, but firm as she addressed the group. "Every fight costs us lives," she said. "We need to think long-term. If we burn ourselves out trying to take them head-on, there won't be anyone left to carry the torch." Jake listened to both arguments, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his respect for Sam's leadership. He knew they couldn't afford division, not when the Vorthak were closing in, but finding common ground seemed impossible. The arguments dragged on late into the night, tempers flaring until voices echoed through the forest. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Chicago, Emily Dawson faced her own dilemma. While analyzing intercepted Vorthak transmissions, she discovered something that chilled her to the bone. The invaders had begun taking hostages. Among them were civilians rounded up during raids, and shockingly, her younger brother Daniel. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't seen him since the invasion began, assuming he'd fled to safety with their parents. Now, hearing his name mentioned in the alien communications, she felt a wave of guilt wash over her. They're using them as leverage. Marcus's replacement, a quiet but skilled hacker named Ryan, explained as they pored over the data. If the resistance keeps attacking, they'll execute the prisoners. Emily clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had dedicated herself entirely to the cause, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and even her own safety to help humanity fight back. But this changed everything. Daniel wasn't just her brother, he was family. And if she did nothing, he might die. "I have to go," she said suddenly, standing up so quickly that her chair toppled backward. "I can't sit here while they hold him." Ryan frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. "You know what happens if you get caught. You'll be putting yourself in danger, and possibly everyone else." "I don't care," Emily snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's my brother. I can't abandon him." The decision weighed heavily on her as she prepared to leave. Packing only the essentials, a flashlight, a knife, and a small toolkit, she scribbled a note explaining where she was going and why. Leaving it on the table, she slipped out of the basement lab under the cover of darkness. The streets of Chicago were eerily quiet, littered with debris from recent battles. Shadows danced in the dim light cast by distant fires, and every sound made her heart race. She knew the risks, but she couldn't turn back. Her destination was a heavily guarded Vorthak compound located near the city's outskirts. Intelligence. Reports suggested it was being used as a processing center for captured humans. Getting inside would be nearly impossible, but Emily had no choice. She spent hours studying the perimeter, memorizing patrol patterns and identifying weak points in the security system. By dawn, she had formulated a plan. Using tools scavenged from abandoned buildings, she constructed a makeshift EMP device designed to temporarily disable electronic locks and surveillance systems. It was crude, but effective, if she timed it right. As she approached the compound under the guise of a frightened civilian seeking refuge, her hands shook with nerves. Every step felt like walking into a trap, but she forced herself to keep moving. When she reached the gate, she activated the EMP. For a brief moment, the hum of machinery fell silent, and the guards exchanged confused glances. Seizing the opportunity, Emily darted through the opening, slipping past bewildered soldiers who struggled to regain control. Inside, the air was thick with despair. Rows of makeshift cells lined the walls, each one filled with terrified prisoners. Emily scanned the faces frantically, searching for her brother. "Daniel," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the captives. Then she saw him, thin and pale, but alive. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by dread. Breaking him out wouldn't be easy, especially with alarms blaring throughout the facility. "Emily," Daniel's voice cracked as he recognized her. "What are you doing here?" "No time to explain," she said, pulling a lockpick from her pocket. "We need to move. Now." Working quickly, she unlocked the cell door and pulled him into the hallway. Together, they moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows as chaos erupted around them. Guards shouted orders, and the sound of boots echoed off the walls. Just as they reached a service exit, a squad of Vorthak soldiers appeared, blocking their path. "Run!" Emily yelled, shoving Daniel toward an alternate route. She turned to face the aliens, clutching a stolen pistol tightly. Her hands trembled, but she fired anyway, aiming for their glowing eyes. One soldier fell, then another, giving her enough time to retreat. When she finally caught up to Daniel, they burst through the exit and disappeared into the ruins of the city. Back at the resistance camp, Jake and Claire argued about the best course of action. Sam had proposed targeting a massive Vorthak weapons depot located deep in enemy territory. It was a bold plan, potentially crippling the invaders' ability to wage war. But it was also incredibly dangerous, requiring a large team to infiltrate. "Hostile land. We can't afford to lose more people," Claire insisted, her voice rising. "Not after what happened last time. And we can't afford to sit back and do nothing," Sam shot back, slamming his fist on the table. "If we don't act now, they'll finish us off." Jake stepped between them, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Enough," he said firmly. "Fighting each other won't solve anything. We need to decide, together, what's best for everyone." His words seemed to calm the room slightly, though the tension remained palpable. As the discussion continued, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Emily had gone missing, leaving behind a note detailing her mission to rescue her brother. The revelation stunned the group, reigniting old debates about personal sacrifice versus collective responsibility. "She risked everything for her family," Claire said quietly, her tone thoughtful. "Can we blame her for that?" Sam shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "No, but we're running out of fighters. Every person matters." Jake looked at both of them, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on him. They were divided, exhausted, and scared, but they weren't defeated. Not yet. Slowly, he spoke, his voice steady and resolute. "We'll support Emily however we can, But we also need to stay focused on the bigger picture. If we work together, we can still win this fight. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the forest, the group began making plans. Their differences hadn't disappeared, but they had agreed to set them aside, for now. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. But as long as they stood united, they had a chance, and sometimes that was enough.